I worked as a blind massage therapist because I was good with my hands. I had a lot of regulars who booked private home sessions. The tips were always incredible. People tend to be generous when they think you can't see the life they're living. Then one day, my sight suddenly returned. It was a miracle I couldn't explain. I thought about telling the world, but then I realized I was making 3 times more money than a sighted therapist. I decided to keep up the act. That one choice led me into a memory that still haunts me to this day. My client for this session was a woman named Millie. She was in her early 30s and one of my most frequent regulars. I rang the bell of a sprawling high-end villa on the edge of the city. Back when I was truly blind, I just knew she lived in a quiet neighborhood and paid better than anyone else. Now that I could see, it was obvious she was swimming in cash. "Come on in," a woman's voice called out from inside. As the door clicked open, I stepped inside and was immediately floored by what I saw. A woman with an incredibly refined face stood before me. She had long, wavy hair and wore a bold shade of red lipstick that matched her nails. She was wearing nothing but a thin, pale pink silk nightgown. When I was blind, I could tell she had a small frame, and I always pictured her as a delicate, petite girl. The reality was the exact opposite. "It's truly stunning. It's just you hurry up and get inside," Millie said, grabbing my arm. She turned and headed toward the living room sofa. Without a second thought, I faked it, tapping my white cane on the floor as I followed her, moving with that hesitant, practiced gait. Behind the living room, there was a lush backyard surrounded by a massive stone wall. Near the glass doors, professional massage table was already set up. Before I could reach the table, I spotted movement on the stairs. A young guy in his early 20s was creeping down from the second floor. He was wearing nothing but a white bathrobe, his chest bare. He wasn't wearing shoes. Probably, so I wouldn't hear him. He blew a kiss to Millie and made a few suggestive gestures. Then he slipped out the back door. I kept my face neutral, but my eyes drifted to a framed photo on the wall. It was a wedding picture of Millie and a man who had to be at least 60 years old. She was cheating on her husband right under his nose. But then again, she was in the prime of her life. That older man probably couldn't keep up with her. I walked toward the table, using my cane to feel the furniture around me. "Where are we focusing today, Millie?" Millie walked over and took my hand. "Follow me." Her voice sounded exhausted, yet there was a strange lingering trace of satisfaction in it. As she got closer, the scent of her perfume and the heat of her skin hit me. She led me to the table and let her nightgown slide off her shoulders before lying face down. "Let's get started. I have a meeting later this afternoon," she muttered. The view in front of me made my heart skip a beat. I had to remind myself of my professional role. I forced myself to focus, opened the bottle of essential oil, and began the session. The moment my hands touched her skin, a low moan escaped her lips. She seemed to realize how it sounded and quickly apologized. "Sorry about that. I was just so exhausted from yesterday." I chuckled softly. I was worried I was being too rough already. Millie turned her head slightly to look back at me. "Actually, I want you to go harder. I really need to let go of some tension." "I'll do my best. Just tell me if it's too much." "By the way, have you been having trouble sleeping lately?" I asked, working the muscles in her shoulders. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice tight as she tried to stifle another sound. "I can feel it in your pressure points. Your energy flow is completely blocked." I pressed down on a specific spot on her neck. Her entire body jolted, and another muffled groan left her throat. "I'm so sorry. Did I hurt you?" Millie looked like she was in heaven. No, don't stop. Keep doing exactly that. You're the only one who actually knows what they're doing, therapist. Just go through the motions. Is there any way to fix this insomnia? I haven't had a good night's rest in days," she asked, biting her lower lip. "It's possible, but I need to deep tissue your neck and back. It's going to be pretty intense. And I'm not sure you can handle the pain." Based on what I was feeling, body was truly reaching a breaking point. Her blood flow was restricted by years of stress and bad posture. If she didn't fix it, she was going to end up in the hospital. Millie didn't hesitate. "It's fine. Do whatever you have to do. I can take it." She shifted her position on the table to give me better access. I stopped holding back. I opened a fresh bottle of oil, coated my hands, and began a standard deep tissue routine on her neck. At first, Millie didn't react much. She was clearly trying to stay composed. That changed when I hit the base of her neck. I felt a massive hard knot right over her spine. The moment I applied pressure, she let out a sharp gasp. "Right there. It's so sore. It's like a throbbing pain." Now that I'd found the source of the blockage, I used both thumbs to pin the knot and slowly work the tension outward. After about 2 minutes, beads of sweat began to glisten on her neck and shoulders. Once I finished the set of movements, I knew the job was done for the day. All set, Millie. We're finished for today already? She asked, rolling over. Her eyes were watery and seemed to be searching for something more. I didn't dare look at her for too long. I grabbed a towel to wipe my face and pretended everything was normal. About the insomnia. You really need to take care of yourself. Don't overwork your body. This massage is just a temporary fix. You're sweet to care, she said. She stood up, cloud of expensive perfume following her. As she headed toward the stairs, I feel all sticky from the oil. I'm going to go upstairs and jump in the shower. You look like you're sweating too. If you're uncomfortable, you should come up and wash off with me. My heart hammered against my ribs at the blatant invitation. I was supposed to be blind. If I got too close to her in a shower, there was a 0% chance I could keep the secret. Was she testing me? I couldn't tell. Most women are hesitant about male therapists, but the blind part usually makes them feel safe. Combine that with the fact that I wasn't exactly ugly, and I was quite popular with the female client. Tell Millie wasn't my first client to be friendly, but she was definitely the boldest. I thought about it for 3 seconds before deciding to decline. If the spa found out I was getting intimate with clients, I'd be fired. If Millie found out I was faking my blindness, I'd be sued or worse. I'd love to, but the shop is slammed today. I can't stay away for too long. I lied, packing my bag. I said my goodbyes and practically ran out of that villa. I worked until well past midnight back at the clinic, before finally heading to my small apartment. I had just finished my own shower and was ready to pass out when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Millie. Why was she calling this late? I hesitated, then hit the green button. Hello? Why did it take you so long to pick up? Her sultry, lazy voice drifted through the speaker. Sorry, Millie. I was just getting into bed. It took me a minute to find the phone. You know how it is for me. Is everything okay? It's the same old problem. That massage helped for a while. But now that it's night, I can't sleep. Can you come over right now and work on me again? Millie was gorgeous. Her vibe was top tier. She was better looking than most celebrities on TV. Any man would dream of a woman like her. And I was no exception. But I knew my place. Women like Millie were dangerous for guys. Like me, Millie. It's the middle of the night. It's probably not a good idea. I stammered. Don't worry about that. Just grab an Uber. I'll make it worth your while. I'll pay you double. Since she put it that way, I couldn't really say no. I was doing this job for the money, after all, and Millie was a goldmine. I agreed, got dressed, and headed back to the villa. I had no idea that this single decision was about to lead me down a path of no return. The Uber dropped me off at the foot of the wrought iron gates just after 2 in the morning. A light, misting rain had begun to fall, turning the streetlights into blurry orange halos on the wet asphalt. I pulled my jacket collar up, grabbed my collapsible white cane from my bag, and extended it with a sharp metallic snap. Click, tap, click, tap. I walked up the long, winding brick driveway, keeping my eyes fixed straight ahead, wide and unblinking, letting the faint light of the estate wash over my retinas without adjusting my focus. It was a habit I'd perfected over the past 3 months, looking through people rather than at them. If you look at someone's eyes, you react to micro-expressions, a twitch of an eyebrow, a flicker of fear, a shift in weight. A blind man doesn't react to those things. A blind man listens to the rasp of cotton against skin, smells the sour tang of anxiety, sweat, and feels the subtle shift of air in a room. The front door of the villa was already resting an inch off the latch. I didn't knock. I tapped the base of the cane against the heavy oak frame. Millie, I called out softly. It's me, the therapist. Come in. Her voice floated down the hallway. It sounded strange, brittle, thin, like dried leaves being crushed underfoot. I stepped inside, bringing the cane across the threshold in a practice sweep. The moment my boot hit the marble foyer, my stomach dropped into a cold, bottomless pit. The house didn't smell like lavender and expensive floor wax anymore. It smelled like iron. Raw, wet, metallic iron. I kept my chin tilted slightly upward, my gaze unfocused, but my peripheral vision was working overtime. On the pristine white marble floor, about 10 feet in front of me, was a dark, glistening smear. Someone had tried to wipe it up with a towel, a cream-colored bath towel that now lay crumpled near the base of the grand staircase, soaked through with mahogany-colored blood. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird.
Turn around, every.
Instinct screamed at me. Drop the bag, turn around, and walk back into the rain. But if I turned around now, if I showed even a second of panic, I'd betray the
lie.
A blind man wouldn't know there was blood on the floor unless he stepped in it or smelled it up close. To a blind man, this was just another quiet house in the suburbs. Millie, I asked, keeping my voice mild, polite. Where would you like me to set up? In the study, she called back. First door on the left past the archway. I swung my cane.
Click. Tap.
The tip of the white fiberglass rod hit the dark puddle on the marble. I felt the stick slick over the fluid, but I didn't
flinch.
I took a step, deliberately planting the rubber sole of my right sneaker straight into the thickest part of the red stain, pretending not to notice the sticky, tacky sound it made as my foot lifted off the floor. I turned into the study. The room was lit only by the warm glow of a single desk lamp. The massage table had already been unfolded and placed near the center of the room. And then I saw him, slumped in a high-backed leather wing chair in the shadowed corner of the room. Was the older man from the wedding photograph. Her husband. His head was tilted back at an impossible, sickening angle against the dark leather. His eyes were wide open, milky and fixed on the ceiling. His chest was caved in near the collarbone, and a heavy, solid brass mantel clock, the heavy, antique kind with exposed brass gears, sat on the floor beside the chair, coated in thick, clotting gore. Standing right behind the chair, half hidden in the drapery shadows, was the young guy in the bathrobe from earlier. He wasn't wearing the bathrobe now. He was dressed in black jeans and a dark hoodie. In his right hand, he was holding a heavy glass ash receiver, his knuckles white around the crystal. His eyes were fixed entirely on me. He was waiting. He was watching my face to see if my eyes darted toward the
corpse. Don't look at him, I told myself.
Look past him. Look at nothing.
Over here, Millie said.
She stepped out from behind the massage table. She had changed out of the pink silk nightgown and into a dark gray cashmere sweater and sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was stark white, her red lipstick entirely bitten away, leaving her lips raw and bleeding. Right here, she repeated, her voice shaking slightly. She took my arm, her fingers digging through my jacket sleeve with frantic, terrified strength. I couldn't lie down in the bedroom. The air felt too heavy up there. I understand, I said softly, letting my arm relax in her grip. Stress can make a room feel suffocating. Why don't you lay face down on the table? Let me get my oils.
Yes.
Yes, okay. She climbed onto the table, sinking into the foam cushion with a long, tremulous exhale. I set my bag on a small side table just 3 feet away from the corpse. The smell of the open head wound was overwhelming, thick, copper-heavy, mixed with the sharp bite of spilled scotch. My throat clamped shut. I had to force myself to breathe through my mouth, taking shallow, quiet air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the young lover step out from the shadows. He moved silently across the Persian rug, coming up right behind me. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and passed it straight in front of my face, barely an inch from my eyelashes. My eyes didn't blink. I kept my pupils fixed on the empty space ahead, letting my hands fumble with the screw cap of the oil bottle, deliberately letting my fingertips slip off the plastic twice before securing a grip. The young man let out a faint, barely audible breath of relief. He lowered his hand and stepped back, nodding at Millie, who was peeking up through the armrest of the table. They thought I was safe. They thought I was a ghost, a blind, deaf to context piece of furniture who happened to have talented hands. Are you comfortable, Millie? I asked, my voice smooth, professional, entirely detached from the sheer terror tearing through my nervous system. Just fix my neck, she whispered into the face cradle.
Please.
Just make the throbbing stop. I poured a pool of jojoba oil into my palms and rubbed them together, generating
heat.
The sound of skin sliding against oil seemed deafeningly loud in the dead silence of the room. I placed my hands on her upper back. The moment my palms made contact with her skin, I felt the sheer, chaotic, violent tension running through her body. Her trapezius muscles were as hard as concrete, locked in a permanent spasm of shock and adrenaline. Every muscle, fiber in her shoulders was screaming. I began to work. I used long, sweeping effleurage strokes, pressing deep into the tissue. You're very tense tonight, I murmured, keeping my head tilted downward, eyes locked on the floor where my red-stained sneaker left faint, sticky half-moons. On the rug. More than this afternoon. I had a bit of a shock, she muttered, her voice muffled by the cushion.
A
surprise visit. Ah, I said, leaning my body weight into the heel of my palm, driving deep into the knot along her shoulder blade. Family? Something like that. In the reflection of the dark window pane across the room, I could see the young lover moving around behind me. He wasn't just standing there anymore.
He was
picking things up. He grabbed Arthur's wallet from the desk. He took a gold watch off the corpse's limp wrist. He was staging a robbery. And then he walked over to my massage bag. I watched his reflection in the glass as he unzipped the front pocket of my canvas tote. He reached inside, pulled out my wallet, pulled out my driver's license, and took a quick, silent photo of it with his phone. My blood ran cold. They weren't just using me as an alibi. They were cataloging me. If the police came asking questions, or if I ever let slip to anyone that I smelled blood that night, they knew exactly who I was and where I lived. Therapist. Millie's voice snapped me back. Yes, Millie? Your hands, they're getting cold. I realized I had stopped moving. I instantly resumed the rhythmic kneading, driving my thumbs into the base of her skull. Forgive me, I was just focusing on this knot behind your ear. It's extremely dense.
You must be suffering from a
terrible migraine. I am, she whimpered. It feels like my head is going to split open. Like your husband's did, I thought, a sickening spike of dark humor flashing through my mind before horror swallowed it back down. For 45 agonizing minutes, I performed the massage. It was the most surreal, terrifying act of my life. I adjusted my angles, used my forearms, asked her about her breath work, and offered mild, calming advice about sleep, hygiene, all while 3 feet away, a dead millionaire was slowly cooling in an armchair, and a murderer was silently wiping down door handles with a microfiber
cloth.
When the 45 minutes were up, I pulled the sheet back over her shoulders and stepped back. That's all for tonight, Millie, I said, wiping my hands on a small hand towel I had brought with me. You need to rest now. Drink plenty of water. Millie sat up slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark, bruised circles. She looked at her husband's body, then looked at me. A strange, twisted look of pity and calculation crossed her face. You're a good man, she said quietly. She reached into her sweatpants pocket and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills. She pressed them into my hand. There had to be at least $2,000 there. You really have no idea how much you've helped me tonight. It's my job, I said, folding the cash into my pocket without counting it, just as a blind man would. Let me help you to the door, she said, sliding off the table. No need, I said quickly, perhaps a little too quickly. I caught myself and slowed down, extending my cane. I remember the layout from earlier. First door. On the right through the foyer, correct? Right, she said softly. I turned and began my slow, methodical walk out of the study.
Click, tap, click, tap.
As I crossed the foyer, I deliberately dragged the tip of my cane through the sticky blood smear on the marble floor, making sure my movements looked completely oblivious, completely blind. I reached the front door, turned the knob, and stepped out into the cool, raining night air. I didn't run. I couldn't run. I knew they were watching me from the second floor windows. I walked down the long, brick driveway at the exact same hesitant, slow pace I had walked up it. Only when I reached the main road, turned the corner, and slipped behind a dense row of hedges out of sight of the villa, did my knees give out. I fell to my knees in the wet grass, leaning against the cold stone wall of a neighbor's estate, and vomited violently into the bushes. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed in my small apartment, staring at the horror-stained soles of my sneakers resting on a sheet of newspaper in the corner of the room. The bills Millie had given me sat on the nightstand, crisp and unblemished, looking like toxic waste. By 8 a.m., the news broke. I sat in front of my small television, watching a live broadcast from outside the high-end villa. Police cruisers with flashing blue lights choked the quiet suburban street. Yellow crime scene tape was stretched across the grand wrought iron gates I had walked through just 6 hours prior. A sharp-featured female reporter with a microphone was standing in the rain, breaking news out of the affluent Oak Ridge neighborhood, where prominent real estate developer Arthur Vance, 62, was found dead in his home early this morning. According to preliminary police reports, Mr. Vance was the victim of a Violent home invasion, burglary gone wrong. I leaned forward, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrests of my chair. His wife, Millie Vance, 31, was reportedly asleep upstairs when the intruder entered the lower level. Mrs. Vance told investigators she heard a struggle and called 911, but by the time officers arrived, the suspect had fled. Authorities state that several high-value items, including jewelry and cash, were stolen from the residence. They were covering it up. The young lover had staged the robbery, Millie was playing the grieving widow, and the police were buying it hook, line, and sinker. And then my phone rang. The sudden chime made me jump out of my skin. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. My breath hitched in my chest. I stared at the phone for 3 agonizing rings before swiping the green icon and holding it to my ear. I didn't say a word. "Is this the therapist?" a cold, sharp male voice asked. It wasn't the young lover's voice. It was deeper, older, carrying the heavy weight of authority. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a raspy whisper. "Who is this?" "I'm Detective Thomas Vance with the City Homicide Division," the man said.
I
"Believe you were at the residence of Arthur Vance early this morning." My heart slammed into my throat. Arthur Vance. Detective Vance. Same last name. Is this about Mr. Vance? I faked a confused, hesitant tone. I heard the news on the TV just now. Is everything all right? Mrs. Vance called me for an urgent late-night massage session. "Mr. Vance is dead, son," the detective interrupted flatly. "He was my older brother." A cold bucket of ice water seemed to dump over my head. The lead detective on the case was the victim's brother. Oh God, I stammered, pulling off the performance of a lifetime. I had no idea. I was just there around 2 in the morning. Mrs. Vance was having terrible insomnia. "I know," Detective Vance said. His tone was strangely dry, lacking any overt emotion, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. Mrs. Vance mentioned, "You were there. She said you're blind." "Yes, sir. I lost my sight 5 years ago." A long silence stretched over the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling on his end. "I need you to come down to the station, son," Vance said softly. "As one of the last people in that house before Arthur died, we need to take a formal statement. Can you catch a cab down here in an hour?" Of course, detective," I said. "Anything I can do to help." "Good," Vance said. "And therapist? Don't worry about your vision. I'll make sure someone guides you down the hallway." The line went dead. The interrogation room at the precinct smelled of old coffee, floor wax, and industrial disinfectant. I sat at the metal table, wearing a pair of dark, tinted sunglasses I dragged out from the back of my closet, a relic from the days when my eyes actually couldn't handle bright light. My white cane was folded neatly on the table in front of me. The door swung open, and Detective Vance walked in. He was a tall, lean man in his late 50s, with graying temples, sunken cheeks, and eyes like polished slate. He looked like his dead brother, same sharp nose, same thin, stern lips. But where Arthur looked like a man who spent his life in boardrooms, Thomas Vance looked like a man who spent his life digging through garbage dumps looking for bodies. He didn't sit down immediately. He walked around the table, his boots making heavy, rhythmic thuds on the linoleum before stopping right in front of me. He leaned down, his face barely 6 inches from mine. Even through the dark tint of my sunglasses, I could see every line, every burst blood vessel in his nose, every cold, calculating twitch of his eyes. "So," Vance said softly, "the blind healer." "Detective," I acknowledged, keeping my face entirely blank, staring straight through his forehead toward the concrete wall behind him. "Millie tells me you've been her therapist for about 6 months, Vance said, pulling out the chair opposite me and sitting down with a heavy creak of leather. "Says you're the best in the city.
says you can feel things in a
person's muscles that regular people can't see. Touch becomes very acute when you lose your sight, detective," I replied, keeping my voice calm, even rehearsed. "You learn to read the body like Braille." Vance nodded slowly, reaching into his suit jacket. He pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag and dropped it onto the metal table with a soft clack. Inside the bag was a pair of dirty, white sneakers. My sneakers. The ones I had left on the newspaper in my apartment. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't expand my lungs. "Officers collected those from your apartment while you were in the transit cab," Vance said nonchalantly, tapping his index finger on the plastic bag. Found them right by your front door. Mind telling me why the soles of your shoes are caked in my brother's blood? The trap was sprung. If I was blind, how could I explain stepping in a pool of blood without mentioning that I felt it, smelled it, or slipped on it? But if I claimed I didn't know it was blood, why didn't I report a strange, sticky substance to the police when I got home? I swallowed hard, letting a look of sudden, panicked realization wash over my face. The reaction of an innocent, disabled man realizing he'd walked into a crime scene. Blood? I gasped, my hands flying up to grip the edge of the table, making sure. My fingers trembled naturally. Oh God, on my shoes? Is that what? That was. What was, son? Vance pressed, leaning forward, his slate-gray eyes boring into mine. When I was walking through the foyer, I stammered, letting my voice shake. My right foot felt like it stuck to the floor for a second.
It was
Tacky. I thought someone had spilled syrup or wine and hadn't cleaned it up. The villa is huge, detective. I just assumed a maid dropped something. Vance didn't move a muscle. He stared at me through the dark lenses of my glasses, trying to catch the micro-twitches of my irises behind the shade. You didn't smell anything? Vance asked softly. A blind man with hyperacute senses. You didn't smell copper? You didn't smell blood? I smelled essential oils, sir. I lied seamlessly. Millie uses a heavy rose and lavender diffuser in the main hallway. It overpowers everything.
I
Had no idea. Oh God. Was he dead while I was in the house? Vance leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. According to the medical examiner, Arthur died somewhere between 1:30 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., Vance said quietly. Blunt force trauma to the cranium. His skull was shattered with an antique clock. You were there from 2:15 to 3 o'clock. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the air like a noose. Which means, Vance continued, while you were massaging my sister-in-law's neck in the study, my brother's corpse was sitting 6 feet away from you. I squeezed my eyes shut behind the sunglasses, pulling my shoulders inward, letting tears of genuine, terrified adrenaline leak out from under the frames. Oh God. Oh Jesus. Millie says she was asleep upstairs when the burglar came in, Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously intimate. She says she woke up, heard noises, got scared, and called you for a massage because she had a panic attack, not realizing her husband was dead downstairs. Vance scoffed, a dark, bitter sound. Does that sound plausible to you, therapist? Vance asked. A woman hears a violent noise downstairs at 1:30 a.m., and instead of calling 911, she calls her blind masser to come over and work on her neck. He knew. Vance knew Millie was lying. He knew the burglary was a fake. I don't know, detective. I wept softly, wiping my face with the sleeve of my shirt. Clients call me at all hours when they have severe panic attacks. Millie has always been unpredictable, high-strung. I didn't question it.
She
paid me double. She paid you double, Vance repeated. To be her unwitting alibi. Vance stood up. He walked around the table and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but it felt like an iron shackle. You're a lucky man, Vance whispered in my ear. If those killers knew you had your sight, they would have caved your head in two. But because they thought you were just a blind fool bumping into walls, they let you walk out that door. He squeezed my shoulder, hard. Keep your dark glasses on, son, Vance said, walking toward the door. Because, as long as Millie and her little boy toy think you're blind, you're safe.
But
the second they realize you saw who was in that room, you're a dead man. He pulled the door open, then paused, looking back at me. Oh, and therapist? Yes, detective? You can go home now, but don't leave the city. I have a feeling we're going to be talking again very soon. I spent the next 3 days trapped in my apartment like a prisoner. I didn't go to the clinic. I called in sick, telling my boss I had a severe flu. I kept the blinds drawn, the lights off, and sat in the dark, watching the street below through a tiny crack in the curtains. Every car that slowed down on my street made my heart burst with panic. Was it the police coming to arrest me for fraud? Was it the young lover coming to slit my throat? On the 4th night, the waiting ended. At 11 p.m., my doorbell rang. I didn't move. I froze in the middle of my small living room, holding my breath. The doorbell rang again. 3 short, sharp bursts. Then, the sound of a key turning in the lock. My front door lock. The door swung open, and 2 figures stepped into the dim entryway of my apartment. It was Millie and the young lover. Millie was dressed in a sleek black trench coat, her long wavy hair pulling back. The young lover, now dressed in leather jacket and boots, stood right behind her, shutting the door behind them and slipping the deadbolt into place. In his hand, half hidden behind his back, was a long, thin steel fillet knife. Therapist. Millie called out softly, her voice echoing in the small, cramped space. Are you home? I stood up from the couch, grabbing my white cane from the side table, forcing my hands to shake, forcing my eyes to look wide, unseeing and terrified. Who's there? I yelled, stumbling forward slightly, tapping the cane frantically against the hardwood floor.
Who is that?
I've called the police. Get out of my house. Calm down, Millie said smoothly, stepping into the living room. She held up her hands, though I pretended not to see them. It's just me. It's Millie. Millie, I gasped, stopping in my tracks, leaning heavily on the cane. What are you doing here?
How did you get a key?
I had a locksmith come by earlier today while you were out, she lied smoothly, stepping closer. I told him I was your sister, and you lost your keys. People are very helpful when you tell them you're aiding a blind man. The young lover moved around the side of the room, positioning himself behind me, blocking the path to the front door. I could see the glint of the street lamp, reflecting off the 10-inch steel blade in his hand. Why are you here, Millie? I asked, my voice trembling with genuine terror. The police questioned me. They took my shoes. They said Arthur was murdered. Millie smiled, a cold, empty, terrifying smile that sent shivers down my spine. I know they questioned you, Millie said, taking another step toward me. Detective Vance is a dog. He won't let this go. He knows Arthur's death wasn't a random burglary. She reached out and gently touched my arm. I flinched, but didn't pull away. He thinks I did it, Millie whispered. He thinks Leo and I killed him for the inheritance. Did you? I asked, letting the question slip out in a breathless panic. Millie chuckled softly, a dry, hollow sound. Arthur was a cruel, abusive old bastard who kept me in a golden cage for 10 years. He threatened to cut me out of his will last week because he found out about Leo. He deserved far worse than a clock to the skull. She squeezed my arm harder. The problem is, Vance is looking for evidence. And he keeps coming back to you. He keeps asking me if I'm sure you're really blind. My heart stopped.
What?
I squeaked out. Why would he ask that? Because Vance is paranoid, Millie said, her eyes narrowing as she searched my face. He told me that a man who loses his sight usually develops better hearing. He said it was impossible for a blind therapist to sit in a room for 45 minutes with a fresh corpse and a killer and not notice something was wrong. She lifted her hand and gently laid her cold fingers against my cheek. So, I came here to see for myself, she whispered. Behind me, I heard Leo take a quiet step forward. The floorboard squeaked, faintly under his weight. Millie, please, I begged, tears welling in my eyes, keeping my focus locked on the blank wall behind her head. I didn't see anything. I swear to God. I'm blind. I didn't hear anything. I was just doing my job. I want to believe you, Millie murmured. I really do. Because if you're blind, you're harmless. You're just a sad little man who got caught in the middle of something bigger than him. Suddenly, without warning, Millie reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small silver pocket knife, and lunged straight at my face, thrusting the tip of the blade directly toward my right eye. It was the ultimate reflex test. A seeing man, watching a blade fly toward his eye, will reflexively flinch, duck, or blink violently. A blind man will not react until the blade touches his skin. The tip of the knife stopped less than a millimeter from my cornea. I could feel the cold draft of the metal off the steel. I forced every nerve in my body to freeze. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I kept my eye wide open, staring straight past the blade, letting the tear that had been forming spill over my lower eyelid and roll down my cheek. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The room was dead silent save for the ticking of my kitchen clock. Millie stared into my pupil, searching for the microscopic dilation of fear. Slowly, agonizingly, she lowered the knife. He's blind, she breathed out, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. She turned to Leo. He didn't even twitch. He's totally blind. Leo lowered his fillet knife, letting out a dark grunt. Good. Then we don't have to clean up another mess. No, Millie said, turning back to me, her voice suddenly turning sweet, almost maternal. She reached up and wiped the tear from my cheek with her thumb.
We
Don't have to kill him, but we do have to use him. Use me? I whispered, my voice shaking. For what? Vance is setting a trap for us tomorrow, Millie said softly. He asked me to come down to Arthur's estate tomorrow night to review some paperwork. He's going to have a full forensics team there trying to recreate the crime scene. He asked me to bring you along so you can show him where you walked and what you touched. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. You're going to go with us tomorrow night, she whispered. And you're going to tell Detective Vance exactly what I tell you to say. You're going to tell him. You heard a strange man's voice outside the window around 1:45 a.m. A heavy, coarse voice with a southern accent. You're going to give him a fake lead. And if I don't, I squeaked. Millie's hand slid down from my cheek to my throat, her fingers tightening slightly around my windpipe. If you don't, she whispered, Leo will make sure your death looks like a tragic home invasion. A blind man, helpless in his own apartment. It would be so sad. She released my throat and stepped back, smiling warmly, as if she had just invited me to a dinner party. We'll pick you up at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, therapist, she said.
cheerfully.
Wear something nice. They left. The moment the front door clicked shut, I dropped my cane, fell to my hands and knees, and gasped for air, cold sweat dripping off my chin onto the floorboards. I had survived the blade, but I was trapped in a box with 2 murders on one side and a relentless detective on the other. If I went to the estate tomorrow and lied for Millie, Vance would eventually break me or uncover my lie, and I'd go to prison as an accessory to murder, plus face charges for faking my disability for financial gain. If I told Vance the truth, Millie and Leo would kill me before the trial ever started. I sat in the dark for 3 hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every option, every angle, every desperate play. And then I realized something. They all had one massive, critical blind spot. Millie and Leo thought I was a helpless blind man they could control. Detective Vance thought I was a helpless blind man he could use as leverage. None of them knew I could see. My sight wasn't a liability. It was the only secret weapon I had left. The next night at 8 p.m., a black SUV pulled up to my curb. I stepped out of my building wearing my dark sunglasses, my white cane tapping rhythmically against the sidewalk. Leo was driving. Millie sat in the passenger
Seat.
I climbed into the back seat. Neither of them said a word during the 40-minute drive back to the sprawling villa on the edge of the city.
The
tension in the car was suffocating, thick enough to cut with a knife. When we arrived, the villa was dark, save for the bright yellow police floodlights illuminating the front foyer. Detective Vance was standing on the porch, wearing a long trench coat, holding a heavy flashlight. 2 uniformed officers were parked in a cruiser down near the
gates.
Mrs. Vance, Vance said dryly as we stepped out of the car.
Therapist.
Thanks for coming. Anything to help clear up this nightmare, Thomas, Millie said smoothly, her voice laced with perfect, tragic grief. We walked inside. The foyer had been swept, but the faint outline of the bloodstain was still visible under the intense ultraviolet lamps set up by the forensic team. Vance led us into the study, the room where Arthur had been murdered. The room was set up exactly as it had been 3 nights ago. The massage table was in the center. The high-backed leather chair was in the corner. A chalk outline marked where Arthur's body had been slumped. Now, Vance said, turning to face us, pulling a small audio recorder from his pocket and hitting record. I want to walk through the timeline one more time. Therapist, you arrived at 2:15 a.m., correct? Yes, detective, I said, holding my cane, staring blankly toward the middle of the room. And you walked straight into this room? Yes, sir. Millie guided me by the arm. Right, Vance said. He turned his slate-gray eyes onto Millie. And Millie, you said you were lying on the table the entire time? Yes, Thomas, Millie said. I was in horrific pain. My neck was locked up. Interesting, Vance said quietly. He walked over to the desk, pulled a manila folder out of his briefcase and opened it. We got the forensic blood spatter analysis back an hour ago, Vance said, his voice dripping with venomous calm. The blood pattern on the floor near the wing chair shows that my brother didn't die at 1:30 a.m. like you claimed, Millie. Millie's shoulders stiffened imperceptibly.
What?
The arterial spray and coagulation state prove he was struck on the head between 2:15 a.m. and 2:45 a.m., Vance said, leaning against the desk, snapping the folder shut. Which means Arthur was murdered while the therapist was in this room. The air in the room turned to ice. Millie gasped, taking a step back. That's impossible. I was on the
Table.
Someone must have snuck in. No one snuck in, Millie. Vance spat, his eyes blazing with fury. The security cameras at the front gate showed no forced entry. The back doors were locked. From the inside, the only people in this house were you, your little lover boy, Leo, who we found hiding in a motel down the street an hour ago, and this blind masser. Vance turned to me. Therapist, Vance said, his voice shaking with restrained rage. Did you hear anything while you were massaging her? Did you hear a clock hitting a man's skull? Did you hear my brother dying 3 feet away from you? Millie turned her head sharply toward me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a murderous, silent warning. Her hand was slipped inside her trench coat pocket, where I knew she was holding that silver blade. If I gave her away, she'd pull that knife and cut my throat before Vance could
Draw his sidearm.
If I lied, Vance would arrest me right here as an accomplice. I took a deep breath. I let my cane slide out of my hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, clattering clack. I reached up with both hands, grabbed my dark sunglasses, and pulled them off my
Face.
I looked straight into Detective Vance's eyes. Not through him, not past him, at him. Vance froze. His jaw dropped slightly. Millie gasped, stumbling back 2 steps, her face draining of every drop of color. Your eyes. I wasn't blind, Detective, I said, my voice loud, clear, and steady, echoing through the hollow room. My sight returned 3 months ago. You, Vance stammered, his mind struggling to process the sudden revelation. You can see? I saw everything, I said, turning my gaze to Millie. Millie pulled the knife from her pocket, her knuckles white, her eyes wild with animal rage. You lying little bastard. Don't move, Millie. Vance roared, drawing his Glock from his holster and aiming it straight at her chest. Drop the weapon. He saw. Millie screamed, her composure entirely shattered, hysteria taking over. He was looking at us the whole time. He saw Leo hit him. He saw me clean the clock. She admitted it. In her blind, frantic rage at being fooled, she confessed right in front of a homicide detective holding an active tape recorder. Vance didn't hesitate. Millie Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Arthur Vance. No, she shrieked, making a desperate, frantic lunge toward me with the blade, driven by pure, unadulterated vengeance. Because I could see, I saw the strike coming long before it reached me. I didn't fumble. I didn't trip. I stepped smoothly to the left, caught her wrist. With my right hand, twisted her arm downward, using the exact leverage technique I'd used on thousands of tight muscles, and slammed her wrist against the edge
Of the massage table.
The knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. Vance stepped in, grabbed her by the shoulders, forced her to the floor, and slapped the cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. Millie thrashed against the floor, screaming curses at me, her red lipstick smeared across her chin, looking like a demonic ghost of the refined woman who had walked into my clinic months ago. You acted blind, she shrieked, tears and mascara running down her face.
You
acted blind the whole time. You monster. Vance pulled her up to her feet and handed her off to the 2 uniformed officers, who had rushed into the room at the sound of the commotion. As they dragged her out into the rain, her screams faded down the long hallway, leaving only the sound of the rain tapping against the window panes. Detective Vance stood in the center of the quiet study. He holstered his gun, picked up my sunglasses from the floor, and handed them back to me. He looked at me for a long, heavy minute. Why didn't you tell me at the precinct? Vance asked quietly. Because if I told you at the precinct, you wouldn't have had proof, I said, putting the glasses into my jacket pocket. She would have blamed it all on Leo, or claimed I was lying to cover my own ass. You needed her to crack.
She only
cracked because she thought a blind man had played her. Vance let out a long, slow breath. A tiny, weary smile touched the corners of his lips. You're a terrible therapist, Vance said, but you're a hell of an actor. He looked toward the doorway, then back at me. Faking a disability to charge higher rates. Technically, that's fraud, Vance noted, his tone shifting into something formal, sharp. I could cuff you right now. You could, I agreed softly. Or you could let the man who solved your brother's murder walk out that front door and never practice massage again. Vance stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then, He turned his back on me, picked up his briefcase from the desk, and walked toward the door. "The rain's stopping, son," Vance called over his shoulder. "Get out of my crime scene before I change my mind." I didn't take an Uber back. I walked. I walked through the cool, damp night air for 5 miles, listening to the city wake up around me. I threw my white cane into a storm drain 3 blocks from the estate. I pulled the wad of cash Millie had given me out of my pocket and dropped it into a charity collection box outside a church on 4th Street. I never went back to the massage clinic. I packed my small bag, gave up my apartment, and moved 2 states over, taking a low-paying job at a lumber yard, where no one cared about my hands and no one asked about my eyes.
It's been years now.
My sight is perfect. I can see the blue sky, the green trees, the faces of strangers passing by on the street. But every now and then, when I lie in bed at night and close my eyes, I'm back. In that dark, cold study. I can smell the thick, copper stench of fresh blood over the scent of lavender.
Oil.
I can feel the tense, frantic spasms in Millie's shoulders under my palms. And I can see the wide, milky, unblinking eyes of a dead man staring up at the ceiling, waiting for a blind man to notice he was gone.